Today we look at how to have a mountaintop experience right where you are. Hang on, or should I say, let go. Chapter 17, verses 1 to 9.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus here is inviting his disciples to have a mountaintop experience in the Transfiguration. But in order to have a mountaintop experience, they're going to have to leave something. You see, if you're in a box, you can't get very far. So they have to get out of the box if they want to have a mountaintop experience. Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up to a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll make you 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." And while he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a cloud from a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And when the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up, and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, O Christ.
Please be seated. When I was in Chicago, I did a very scary thing. I volunteered to sit at the door of a homeless shelter all night long in front of a door, and it was a homeless shelter for abused women. And the reason they had me at the door was in case an angry husband or an angry boyfriend or a pimp broke through the door and would try to take them or hurt them. And so here I am, all night long, sitting in a lawn chair, armed with my smile. This boy from Fairport, Michigan, from a population of 100, was in the ghetto of Chicago, sitting in front in a lawn chair. That would never have happened if I hadn't got out of the box. And I got out of the box because of the compassion of Jesus. It was Jesus. For the first time I heard the words to look after those, to be a part of a solution. And so I had to do that. And can I tell you, I was scared. The disciples here are scared, right? They follow Jesus up the mountain, and then they have these, and they're terrified. Jesus led them up to a mountain, and now they're afraid. After the day that word about we're to care for the oppressed is what got me out of the box and led me up the mountain. So there I was. There's more to the story. I'm sitting there in the lawn chair, and middle of the night, I hear a rushing wind, like the sound of a train, and it entered the room. And then the wind hit my body, the sound hit my body, and this incredibly crushing weight went over my body, and I couldn't move. Later on, I discovered that the word for the glory in the Old Testament is weight. This was really heavy, man. It was the weight of God was on my body. That would never have happened if I had stayed in the box. And it was that experience, actually, that later led me to get involved with the homeless. I never saw things quite the same after that experience. Often, folks, we're afraid of a God we can't control. I think we want a safe God. I think we want safe rules in a safe valley. People who say they would love to see God haven't seen God. Because every time someone sees God in the Bible, they fall on their face in fear. I think on a deeper level, we humans want a God we can control because it feels safer than there. We like that, right? We want a God who stays behind the curtain. We're afraid of a God we can't control. And so we invent ways to keep God in the box. Notice here when Peter's afraid, what does he do? Let's build a house, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Let's get back under control here. This is out of control. We don't like that. Right? He's afraid. I remember when the weight came over my body, I felt like I was supposed to do something, and I tried to raise my hands, and I felt the gentle rebuke of God. Right? I don't need your help. Right? This isn't about you. The Spirit blows where it will. Right? Because I wanted to take back control. Let me do something, God. Often we want to do that. There's Luther, and he's in the box of his religion. And he's trying so hard to control God's response to him. Trying to do all this religious stuff. Until he got out of the box and discovered all that Christ had already done for him. And Luther was free. The experience of God is always an experience of vulnerability. I was vulnerable in that lawn chair. The disciples are vulnerable on a mountain. Anyone here driven around a mountain? And you're that close to the edge and mountains are scary by definition. You could fall off. So much of religion, however, is a box where we are in control of God, or thinking we are. So we see it as an opportunity to be in control, rather than an opportunity to be vulnerable. So when you come up communion, are you vulnerable to the grace of Christ? You know, one of the reasons I became a Lutheran was because the church I used to go to only served communion once a month. And sometimes once every 3 months. And only certain people were allowed to come up. And I wanted to experience Jesus every week. Give us this day our daily bread. He's not just talking about, he's talking about the more than that. And it's that experience of Christ in the elements that, When you sing, are you vulnerable or are you just mouthing the words? Love is always vulnerable, isn't it? Can you love someone and not risk being hurt? You can't. And so we invent ways to keep Christ in the box. And so Christ then, guess what Christ has to do? He has to get us out of the box. Jesus has been slowly, steadily getting his disciples out of the box of their religion and their securities and all that. And now he's headed toward Jerusalem, toward his own moment of supreme vulnerability. Right? Christianity is everything. It's about vulnerability. And so there his inner circle will need to experience that Jesus is not just another rebel killed by the political authorities, but that he is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. That's what Moses and Elijah represent, the law and the prophets, that all of the Old Testament has accumulated in this one who is vulnerable for all of us. And his disciples need to see so much more than they thought it was how it was supposed to look. That's always the pattern. Often that's the pattern in the Bible. So there's Jacob. Remember, Jacob is this, his name means liar, actually. He's been trying to be in control his whole life. But he's vulnerable now. He's out in the field by himself, and an angel comes and wrestles with him. And the angel dislocates his hip, and he changes his name to Israel in that moment of vulnerability. By the way, and he would keep that injury the rest. Never trust a minister who doesn't walk with a limp. Because it means they haven't been vulnerable. Their egos need to be broken. And then there's Moses. Remember, Moses committed murder. And where is he? He's hiding in the wilderness. He's vulnerable. He's exposed. And it's that when he hears the burning bush. He has his own mountaintop experience in a place of vulnerability. And then there's Mary, and she's a pregnant Non-married woman, is that vulnerable in that culture at that time? Oh boy. And it's there she hears the angels. And there's Christ hanging on the cross. Can't get any more vulnerable than that. Naked on the cross for you and for I. Take up your own cross and follow me. That sounds pretty vulnerable. Christ has to get us out of the box. God never forces vulnerability on any of us. Rather, the grace of God encourages us more and more. Or as the saying goes, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with what? One step. One step out of Fairport, Michigan. Led to Chicago. Led to me sitting in a lawn chair. Led to the experience of God. Christ is on the vulnerable path that allows us to see what we have not seen in the security of our boxes. Christ has to get us out of the box. And when we're moving out of the box, folks, we're going to need reassurance to stay out of the box. Because we want to go back there. I want to go back there all the time. The disciples get two reassurances in their anxiety. When they're tempted to go back into the box, a voice from heaven says, "This is my son," and then he adds something. Listen to him. Don't let the voices of the box. In our anxiety, when we're tempted to go back into the box and feel safe, remember that our anxiety represents an opportunity. Today, when I'm anxious, there's an opportunity. Why am I afraid? Why do I want to? God might be calling me to do something. See, there's an opportunity to have a mountaintop experience. An opportunity to experience something I did not know was possible when I was in the box. See, we can settle for managing our anxiety in the valley of predictability, or we can have a mountaintop experience. There's a second reassurance. Jesus comes and touches them in their fear. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome with fear. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he says, and do not be afraid. When we get out of the box, we can expect Jesus to touch us and reaffirm the choices that we've made to follow him. You see, Christ never leaves us alone in our anxieties. He's present, helping us and to take the next step up the mountain. You know, can I say, I used to be terrified to speak in public. Did you know that the first time I spoke in a little church, I almost came this close to throwing up in the middle of the sermon? That would have made a nice sermon, huh? And it was terrible. Boy, did I stink. It was terrible. But I heard the call. There I am in seminary years later, and I haven't improved a whole lot. And, they're out there critiquing my sermon, and I couldn't get my foot to stop. My foot kept going like this. Is that distracting? There's people out there saying, you thought I was bad. You should have seen the guy in seminary who couldn't stop his foot from stopping. That was me. But you know how many times I stood up after that and I would hear the grace of Christ, I'd hear the voice of Christ. Get up there. Don't be afraid. I called you to do this. The Bible spells vulnerable Faith, not Control. We need reassurances to stay out of the box. And the more we stay out of the box, the more central Christ becomes. The more we follow him, the further away we get from the box. Jesus came and touched them. Get up and do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Right? All of us are born in a box. The box of what we've been told. A box that promises us security and safety. And those are good things. You know, our family, our culture, all that. We are free to love Escanaba. Right? We're free to love where we came from. But we won't find our deepest humanity there. We won't have a mountaintop. We won't have the The real mountaintop experiences that, unless we're willing to follow Christ into scary places. So, let me see. If I asked you to sit in a different spot next Sunday, you see how this comes right down to where we live? Oh, I'm comfortable there. If I asked you to risk being vulnerable when you go up for communion. See, I know when I'm being protected. By the way, I think a lot of men, and I want to applaud the men who are here today, I think a lot of men don't go to church because they've been told their whole lives it's not good to be vulnerable. Men have to be strong. BS. That's the box talking. We find our deepest humanity not in the box, but when we follow Christ. So what's your next step? Here or there? There's the mountaintop. There's security. Those are our choices today. May we follow Christ. Amen.